Great Lakes Now, live, coming to you from Cleveland. Thanks for being with us. We're going to go right now to the next session, Asian Carp Invasion, what to expect when you're expecting. Christy McDonald is going to be the moderator for you for the next hour.
The proposed separation of Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River Basin. eDNA, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about who is really in charge here and what will happen next, and really the best way to keep Asian carp out of the Great Lakes. I'm going to moderate the session with a question and answer format with our panel. I will follow up comments that they have made. I will sometimes perhaps ask some other panel members to comment on some of the comments that have been made. And then the last 30 minutes of this discussion will belong to you in the audience. If you have any questions for our panel, you can get up to any one of the microphones that are placed around the room and you can ask your questions. We ask that you try to keep them brief so we can get as many people in to ask their questions as possible. I'm going to introduce the panel now, and when I introduce each person, after I give just a brief presentation of who they are, they're going to be able to give us a few words, about 3 minutes or so, about why they're here to talk today about the Asian carp issue and how they fit into the discussion. I'm going to start off first with Becky Cudmore. She is the Senior Science Advisor and Manager at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Center of Expertise for Aquatic Risk Assessment. Becky's field of research is aquatic invasive species, and as a senior science editor, Becky provides science advice and information on aquatic invasive species to senior government officials within and outside DFO. She also conducts and advises risk assessments to identify the level of biological risk associated with potential invasive species. Becky has just been awarded a Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her years of work on aquatic invasive species in the Great Lakes. So Becky, go ahead.
Well, great. Well, first, thank you very much to the coordinators and hosts of this session and for the much appreciated invitation to participate in this discussion, and thank you all for staying. Our shared Great Lakes are no strangers to invasive fishes. A recent study has shown that 69 fish species have been introduced into the Great Lakes, and more than half of these are now established, altering the balance of this ecosystem. Most of these fish species were found by chance or when their numbers were so great as to be detected, and they arrived unseen and unknown to us, thereby putting us in a very much a reactive mode. At the point of discovery, our options to eradicate or manage many of these species are few. The options that do exist are costly. Most aquatic invasive species programs around the world are preventative based on risk. By identifying high-risk species before their arrival, there is a greater chance for actions to minimize risk. With respect to bighead and silver carps, we are in a unique position to see this invasion coming. These fishes are highly effective invaders, but we have an opportunity to be proactive and make a difference on their introduction, establishment, or impact in the Great Lakes. If we think of the Great Lakes as our home to protect, we need to have a thorough understanding of these species and the risks and threats that they pose. We need to know how they may enter our home. Will they arrive in the front door or back door, or have we forgotten about a window upstairs? We also need to know what damage they may cause to effectively and efficiently determine our best courses of action to protect our home. As a step towards this, a binational ecological risk assessment has been completed by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and the U.S. Geological Survey. This was done to provide advice on bighead and silver carps in the Great Lakes using the most up-to-date and available scientific information available. Bottom line, the lakes, our home, are at risk. If not for the work underway, this risk would have already been realized. Directing and refining actions need to continue. These shared Great Lakes are ours, both countries, to protect. This is best done by arming ourselves with the most firm foundation in science and advice, and by working together. We see this as a unique opportunity to be proactive, and that I'm very optimistic that this work will continue.
Thanks, Becky. We look forward to hearing more as we go along in our session. I'm going to introduce now Colonel Frederick Drummond, Jr. He is the commander of the Chicago District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Colonel Drummond is responsible for water resources development in the Chicago metro area. primary mission in that district is flood risk management, navigation, shore protection, emergency management, environmental functions, and support for others. Colonel Drummond was commissioned into the Army Corps of Engineers in 1989 and has served around the country and overseas, including in Afghanistan and Iraq. Colonel, would you like to go ahead and give us your opening statements?
Thank you very much, Christy. First of all, I'd like to thank Helen R. Waters and Great Lakes Coalition for asking me to participate in this very open dialogue that we're going to have here today. I'm equally joined by some colleagues that I would like to have stand up. Dave Romano is currently our program manager for Glimmerous. Dave is going to go back to his day job, and Colonel retired Jack Drolet is now going to stand in and be sort of our long-term Glimmerous program manager. You're going to hear a couple terms today. One of them is CAWS, Chicago Area Waterways. That is managed by Nicole Roach. And then also you're going to hear a little bit, as Christy had talked about, is eDNA, and I have Dave Schulenberg. I think he's in the back somewhere. So as you're walking about and enjoying this conference, please make sure you take time to talk to the experts that are there out on the ground doing this for us. As a member of the Asian Carp Regional Coordination Committee, the Corps is committed to preventing Asian carp, specifically bighead carp and silver carp, from becoming established in the Great Lakes. Slide, please. What you're going to see here is a four-prong slide, and it basically lays out our strategy. USAE supports us through a four-pronged strategy. You got it right there. Yeah, I think it's right next to you. So thank you. Thank you very much. USAE supports us through a four-pronged strategy. The first one, the first line of operation, we call operating electric barriers in the Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal. The second line that you see sort of in the green is studying the effectiveness of the barriers and strengthening the barriers as appropriate. The third line is we have a very extensive monitoring program, and then the last line, as many of you have been discussing, is our line on Glimmerous. Just a little bit of background. The Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal is a man-made hydrologic connection between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River that carries sewage away from Chicago and provides also a navigational channel. Sanitary Ship Canal was constructed by the Chicago Sanitary District roughly in the 1900s. Now the Metropolitan Waterway Reclamation District of Chicago manages that in close coordination with the Corps of Engineers. In discussion of the first line of operations, barrier operations, the barrier is a controlled technology, a broad interagency effort to prevent the Asian carp from establishment in the Great Lakes. Through a very rigorous partnership with the Coast Guard, the Asian Carp Regional Coordination Committee, the Corps remains committed in operating the barriers as safely as possible. As you can imagine, it is very, very complex configuration that we have going on out there. While research and monitoring indicate that small Asian carp currently are not within the vicinity, and I repeat that, not within the vicinity of the fish barriers, the Corps increased the operating parameters of one of our barriers to 2.3 volts. The electric field can be characterized by equipment parameters of frequency, which means sort of duration, and voltage of DC pulses into a water. I sort of use like a collar on a dog, like a little shock collar. It emits voltage into the water, which will repel the fish from coming upstream. Multiple barriers are needed to provide redundancies. A barrier are complex electrical and mechanical systems and must be periodically powered down for maintenance. More than one barrier is needed so that at least one barrier can be active while the other one's down for maintenance work. We're currently, if you look at on your right-hand side of the slide at the very top, we're in the final stages of designing the final barrier, which will make a suite of barriers out there to even enhance the overall effectiveness of the barrier system. Our second line of operations, monitoring. It consists of traditional netting, emitting the electrical current from a boat and netting stunned fish. We do that all over the Chicago Area Waterway as well as the Illinois Waterway System. In 2011, the ACRCC Monitor and Rapid Response Work Group spent over 5,000 person hours monitoring with conventional gears, the netting type of equipment in the cause and upstream of the barriers, over 325 hours of electrofishing, 78 miles of contracted commercial netting. I actually took part on several of these and worked with the fishermen and witnessed firsthand how harvesting does work. This represented the net sample in over 68,000 fish and more than 60 species. Here's the key point. No big head or silver carp were captured or observed above the barrier in 2011 and 2012. Hundreds of routine monitoring trips have produced only one Asian carp, big head, above the barrier system, which was captured in 2010. Our early analysis tells us that fish was brought in probably by a local fisherman and put in, and it just stayed in the same location and grew to the size that it was. USACE is leading an interagency eDNA calibration study called eCals with the USGS and the Fish and Wildlife to reduce uncertainty surrounding eDNA results and refining the very fine-tuning the eDNA so we can truly understand what it means. We're going to continue to investigate the other potential eDNA source, such as dead fishes from barges, vessels, stormwater input, fishing gear, sediments, fish-eating birds. We're putting that all into our eCal study so we can better understand exactly what eDNA is telling us. Right now, we don't know if the fish is alive or dead, so we're going to fine-tune that a little bit, if you will. Barrier effectiveness. We have high confidence of the effectiveness of the barrier based on the results of past and ongoing research and field testing. USACE studies a range of factors that could potentially reduce the efficacy of the electric dispersal barrier system. And so we continually monitor the effectiveness of our barrier through various techniques. And I can assure you the barrier does work as designed. We use also ultrasonic telemetry as one monitoring tool. We employ this all the way down the Illinois waterway system. We individually code transmitters that are surgically implanted into the fish, and their movement is tracked on a network of stationary hydrophones that's in the water. To date, we have 182 tagged fish in the cause. No Asian carp is tagged. These are common carp that are tagged so we can actually monitor the movement. And with a detection rate of 75% on these 182 fish, we've collected over 5.4 million hits, indicating no tagged fish have moved upstream past the barriers. So that gives me a little bit more confidence that the barriers are working as designed. Just a little bit, and I know this has been a source of everybody's concern, glamorous. You can see the language, Water Resources Development Act of 2007 directed the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a feasibility study to determine the range of options and technologies to prevent the risk of aquatic nuisance species in an interbasin transfer type scenario. We know that there's 90 type of different technologies that we're currently reviewing, and we also know that there is now 38 ANS type of species that we're looking at that can transfer through both basins. One note, you may have heard of the new public law 1538, which has been released. It's called Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. The Corps of Engineers currently have that in hand, and I'll talk just a little bit about that. So, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act directs USACE to expedite the completion of WRDA 2007, our initial authorization. The report is now required to be complete by January 2014. Section 1538 also requires a 90-day report due to the ASAs or due to Congress on the 5th of October, so my team is working at very hard right now trying to meet all those milestones. The 90-day report will outline two scenarios: a plan to complete the Glamorous report required by MAP 21 using existing funds. Right now we have about $3 million under the current plan, And then we're also going to outline a plan if we had additional funds. And I might add that that's a very important comment, is that, you know, I can only plan on the money, the authority and the appropriations that I currently have. But what we're going to do in the MAP 21 language is we're also going to say what we can do and what we can't do with the current amount of money that we have. My term is, like I said, working the very details of this 90-day report. And unfortunately, a lot of this is pre-decisional, so I will probably veer away from any detailed questions on specifics to the MAP 21. The very last slide sort of lays out a timeline and just a couple takeaways for everybody in the audience. If you look clear to the left, there is a project management plan and the various products that we've already produced. You can find this on our website, and at the end I'll show you how to get to that. The other key is the near term. You know, we have Focus Area 1, which is the cause, which I spend a lot of time in because I'm from Chicago, but we also got Focus Area 2, which consists of 18 other different pathways. There will be an executive report that's going to be released this Friday on all those pathways that eventually this information will come out and you'll be able to see it. But what's more important is that future input that we can get from everybody in here on recreational fisheries, charter fisheries, risk assessment, and our screen control measures that we're going to eventually use as we produce a report. And it's called the GLEMAS report to Congress in the first quarter, or correction, in January of 14, which will give Congress a report that lays out the range of options that we're recommending to them, and then obviously Congress will take a look at the report and advise us on which direction they want to go. So I always end by saying the following: stay involved. You can go to our glimmers.anl.gov website. You can also tweet us if you're into that, and talk to us on Facebook. We pay close attention to all that when it comes in, and we do take the time to answer it. So I always end on by saying that, you know, we're at a point, and I compliment everybody out in the audience, because without your voice, you know, this would not raise to the level that it has right now. It's very important. It's important to the Corps, and it's important to you, and I would ask that you continue to highlight the concerns that you have, and we'll address it in a manner that is the most professional and the right thing to do for everybody in the Great Lakes region. Thank you.
Thanks, Colonel. I'd like to introduce now Pete Mulvaney. He's an advisor with Greenleaf Advisors, and Pete has played many roles when it comes to environmental engineering all over the world, including the restoration of floodplains and wetlands. Pete has also served as the Director of Sustainability for the Chicago Department of Water Management. He recently provided key technical advice on flooding and water quality ramifications for the Great Lakes Commission study to redesign the Chicago Area Waterway Systems. Hi, Pete.
Hi, thank you, Christy. As she said, I was involved in a study that was looking at the physical separation of the cause, a hydrologic barrier within the cause system, in order to stop the invasive species from transferring between the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi basins in both directions. In addition, the study was charged with identifying the impacts of putting in that kind of a barrier. Obviously, you put a barrier in the middle of an active system, there's going to be significant impacts. And then create solutions that improve the transportation, the water quality, and the drainage system. So these are three very different or very complex systems, but the charge in the study was to look at how a barrier, a physical barrier within the cost system would impact these transportation, water quality, and drainage systems. And if I could, I'm going to hop up and describe why Chicago is the center. I won't be long, it's only one slide.
That's okay.
Why is Chicago the center of all this focus? And as the Colonel indicated, if you look at that map up there, the Colonel was talking about the drainage system a little bit. And if you look to the, what I'll describe here is that in the middle of the picture is a subcontinental divide running through Chicago. And not many folks realize there's that divide. And originally, those blue rivers up there, the blue rivers were the original drainage, and the northern river, the Chicago River, drained to the east to the Great Lakes Basin, and the Calumet River down to the south, the Blue River, was draining to the Great Lakes Basin, while west of that subcontinental divide, the Des Plaines River drained out to the Mississippi Basin. Now, due to pollution from urban runoff from Chicago developing around the river system, in 1900, a channel was opened up. The red lines represent the artificial channels that were dug, and breaking that divide, sending the drainage from Chicago down into the Mississippi Basin by connecting these different river systems. And that's really the rub that we have here. So that ship and sanitary canal, the red channels are what allowed, of course, we benefited for the last 100 years from the improved drainage and the shipping that goes on through the system. And now, of course, invasive species are also migrating back and forth. And that's really the reason why Chicago is the center of the trouble for Asian carp making its way northward. And what our study looked at were over 20 different locations where you might put in one of these barriers. We looked at barriers all the way close to the lake, at the interface of the lake and the river, all the way down past the confluence of the Calumet, of the Cal-Sag River and the Ship and Sanitary Canal. So over 20 locations where we looked at the transportation, water quality, and drainage impacts, and tried to develop solutions. And what we found, of course, is very complicated. These three systems are interrelated and interdependent. But very quickly to highlight, and what I'd like to ask you all in the audience to do is just mentally place a barrier somewhere in the system, within the river system, and think about, will that stop invasive species? How many barriers will I need? And what are the impacts to those three systems? So that's what we did. For example, near the lake, if you place a barrier up by the Chicago River in the lake, you're impacting one of the busiest locks with respect to recreational boating. Down in the Calumet, you're separating Laker ships from its terminals in the Calumet River system. Just as an example, as you go down further south, if you put your barrier downstream and you think about the drainage implications, well, what you're doing is the drainage for the last 100 years has been going down there, and now you need to take all that water and push it back. That would include water quality impacts, of course, improvements to wastewater treatment plants. But there are ways to solve the problem. And what we found in our study is that rather than looking at the extremes, but looking towards the middle of the system, near the natural hydrologic divide, that there are opportunities, and we're discovering opportunities where we can find value and improve the transportation, water quality, and drainage systems within Chicago while stopping invasive species. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Pete. I want to introduce now Heather Loebner, and maybe, Colonel, if you could pass your microphone down so you could share with her, that'd be great. Heather is the Executive Director for Corporate Responsibility at ArcelorMittal, the world's leading steel company that has facilities in many other places, and among them Chicago, Indiana, and Cleveland. Heather directs corporate responsibility engagement and leads sustainability initiatives. She is engaged in environmental leadership and public-private partnerships. Heather?
Thank you. And so I'm also want to thank the audience for having me here representing industry and commerce. We're just one employer along the basin, but for those of you who might not know us, ArcelorMittal is the world's largest steel manufacturing and mining company. Christy mentioned a couple of our facilities. We actually have 9, and we're not only in the U.S., but we're also in Canada. So the water and the basin not only is a jewel to us, but it's also a very important resource, and we appreciate its sustainability and the importance of this issue around Asian carp. We actually use the water. Pete mentioned transportation, so that'll be the first one I mentioned. We use the waters for transporting raw material and finished products. So it's critical. We know that we're just one member of industry that does this. Actually, about $16 billion worth of commerce are transported through those Chicago waterways that Pete illustrated on the map. We also use water in the manufacturing process as well. So we really recognize the sustainability of these systems is so important to us and our business to be sustainable as well. To that end, we actually participate in several programs. One is a public-private partnership called Sustain Our Great Lakes, and we try to really restore and preserve the basin including addressing invasive species as one issue with the federal government, and we have 5 agencies involved with that, led by National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, working with US EPA, NOAA, US Fish, and many others. So when it comes to this issue, we look forward to participating and giving our perspective. We recognize that the waters are a critical mode of transportation for many. They are also lessen our environmental footprint as well as lessen others' environmental footprint compared to other modes of transportation. They're also safer. And so we look forward to looking at different alternative solutions that meet both the needs of business and commerce and the environmental aspects.
Thanks very much, Heather. We appreciate it. And last but definitely not least, Erin McDonough. Erin is the Executive Director of Michigan United Conservation Clubs, and she has worked as MUCC's Conservation Education Director and as a member of its Resource Policy Team. She is a member of many councils and a trustee of the Great Lakes Fishery Trust, and recently Erin was appointed as co-chair of Governor Rick Snyder's Blue Ribbon Panel on State Parks and Outdoor Recreation in Michigan. Erin?
Thank you. I have a couple slides, and the slides that I'm going to show you are not going to be any new news to anybody in this audience. But I have a point. Whether I can get there in 3 minutes, I don't know, but I will do my best. So what I love the best about my job in MUCC and what we do as part of the NGO community is that we get to work every day with the people that have the passion for the resource. It's not their job, it's their way of life. And what sportsmen and women and conservationists and environmentalists alike love about the resource is they like to get out there, they like to use it. So oops, I think I maybe pushed the wrong button. Oh, okay, here we go. So, economics. The fishing, boating, economics, Great Lakes value over $10 billion annually. And you can see up here is a distribution state by state, but then overall the bar along the bottom is showing you recreational boating and fishing. So huge economic value. The Great Lakes are a driver. Cost of invasive species. What you're seeing here is an annual cost of just 3 invasive species in the Great Lakes. I mean, we have 162 and growing. But here you have zebra mussels, you have the Asian carp, you have the sea lamprey. So we spend a lot annually to address invasive species. Here you have the results of part of the Glimmer study here. You have the 3 different options for actually hydrologically separating the Mississippi from the Great Lakes Basin. You can see this is a 17-year cost, so dependent on which of the 3 areas you're looking at, whether you're close to the shore, whether you're far away, whether you're at the midpoint. The midpoint here, you're looking at around a $6 billion cost over 17 years. Now, the line you see furthest to the right is your 17-year cost on invasive species management. Again, only of those 3 species, zebra mussel, sea lamprey, Asian carp, and this does not include if Asian carp get into the Great Lakes. So if we get Asian carp, these costs are going to be astronomical compared to what they are today. But I just wanted to give you a little comparison about here's the amount you could spend to actually make a difference and do some protection. Because not only are we talking about Asian carp when we talk about a hydrological separation, you're talking about all the other invasive species that are moving up and down this channel. And then you look at your cost of what you're spending, it's kind of a no-brainer. So this is just a slide to give you an example of the type of media coverage or actually this is a timeline of Asian carp issues in the Great Lakes. So starting way back in 1990, Asian carp started swimming up towards the Great Lakes. Here we are in 2012. So this issue has really been around for a long time as we've been talking about it. We've been looking at, things heated up with the barrier around 2007 where that was going to help protect us. And then we're moving into 2012 where now things are happening a little bit more rapidly. But the point is, this has taken a long time. Thanks. supposed to have another slide that just has a bunch of media clips on it. So the point of that is this issue has been one of the best covered by the media that I have ever seen. I mean, there is national media, there's state-specific media. I mean, this is even on ESPN. I mean, it has been all over the place for years. People know about this issue. So when you're talking about the general public and what they do and don't know about this issue, here's what they know. The Great Lakes are really important to them. They think that the recreation, the protection of the Great Lakes is important. 2, it is cost effective. It is going to cost us a lot less to put forth a solution than it's going to cost us to control increasing problems. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. 3, we've been at this a long time and we still haven't managed to come to a solution. So what's the problem and why is it taking so long? I mean, that's what the public's thinking, and they know about this issue because the media has done such an excellent job. And they've been hearing about it, they've been talking about it for a long time. So the point being is that the role of the NGO community and the role of the public is to make sure that this issue is a voting issue, and the frustration that is out there on the ground with this issue, because we've been, thinking around with it for so long, is really rampant, and people are wondering why. Why can we not do a common sense solution to this problem? So from the public's perspective, they have this information. They boiled it down to those 3 bullet points. It's Great Lakes are good. It's cost effective to put a solution in place, and the time is now.
Thanks so much, Aaron. All right, we're going to go into a question and answer session. Before then, we get some questions from the audience. And so, Becky, I'm going to start with you down there. Talk a little bit about the risk assessment your study was about, and tell us what you got out of it.
Okay, sure. Well, I've been directed to keep the answers short, and so I will do that. So we did conduct a risk assessment. There has been previous risk assessments done that looked at what was the risk to Canadian waters, what were the risks to American waters. Those were very broad risk assessments because we were asked very broad questions. Recently, there's been a lot more research being done, thanks to all the work that's being done in the United States. So we have a lot more information on the biology and ecology of Asian carp. And we also, in turn, had a lot more new questions, very specific questions about the Great Lakes that needed answering. Questions about, what are all the entry points? We've here one, is there more out there? What would the vulnerable areas be in the Great Lakes? And other questions that required some science advice to better understand the threat that these species pose. So the risk assessment was conducted very specifically on bighead and silver carp for the Great Lakes. And while there are a lot of key results for each step in the invasion process from arrival to consequence, basically, overall, the key result is that it was very important that we reduce the probability of introduction. That is our best bet in protecting the Great Lakes. Now, depending on where one is in that invasion process, would determine where best to interrupt the probability of introduction. Whether you're at pre-arrival, at the arrival stage, at the establishment stage, or at the spread stage, that depends on where best to interrupt this invasion process. By doing this, we can prevent, we can delay, we can reduce the expected consequences should Asian carp arrive in the Great Lakes. By focusing our activities at the population, focusing our activities on population management at the invasion front, we felt that was probably our best bet in order to protect the Great Lakes as a whole and interrupt that probability of introduction. And basically the take-home message is that overall the risk is highest for the central lakes, so lakes Michigan, Huron, and Erie, and a little less risk relative to the central lakes for the terminal lakes.
I want to direct a question to Colonel Drummond. A lot has been made about the study and about the timing of the study. When you actually give your report to Congress in 2014, do you plan on giving them all of the options, or do you plan on giving them options with recommendation?
That's a very good question. The Glimmerous report will include a range of options, and I have said this before. You know, we're taking the 90 A&S options that are out there. It's going to go through a very rigorous screening process so we can bring that down to a manageable number that we can present to Congress in the Glimmer's report so they can make a decision on which direction they want to go.
But will the Corps give a recommendation?
No. No, it's going to be a report that's going to give them a range of options, and you know, there is a big difference. You know, a feasibility study would end up with a signed chief's recommendation. In this case, it's not really a feasibility study. It's sort of a modification, and what we will present to them is a range of options so they can decide on the best direction to go.
I want to, again, look at a little bit of the timing, and I know that the Army Corps of Engineers has been under fire from everyone from politicians to environmental groups about the length of time it has taken for the report. I want to quote from you two also editorials from newspapers around the basin. Just wrote recently, September 1st in Cleveland, they wrote, "The Corps is finally, thanks to a bipartisan boot in the pants from Congress, promising action." And then in Milwaukee, they wrote, "The Army Corps of Engineers is looking more like a guy who can smell smoke but won't admit there's a fire because he can't see flames." How does the Corps respond to that kind of criticism about the scope of the study that you're doing and indeed the options that you have to present?
Yeah. Well, it's a very complex problem, and as most of you can understand, most of you in this room has been dealing with it for some time. I would just submit to you that you know, the Corps takes a very deliberate process. We take input in from everybody, and we try to stick to the facts, and we make the best decision that's going to work for the public at hand. You know, so the time, just look at what happened down in Louisiana. You know, the Corps responded. We fixed the levee system down there, and the end result was recently it worked out pretty good. It's the same thing here. I think we need to take, we need to be a little bit patient, not too much. We need to continue to move forward and come up with the best range of solution so our members of Congress can take a hard look at it and advise the Corps or other agencies on which direction they want to go.
Pete, in talking about the separation study and looking at timing and cost to do this, how would this actually change the Chicago Area Waterway System?
Well, I think you heard from Aaron earlier. I mean, it is, and I'll turn it over to Aaron, it is a very, very complex undertaking. 9.1 million people. In the 1900s, I think we were closely to like 1.1 million people in Chicago. You know, our latest census say we're at 9.1. Chicago lives on that canal. It is a way of life, and it's going to be a very complex undertaking, and I might add, it is one of our options that will be presented to Congress, is what Aaron had talked about, hydrologic separation.
Pete, I know that you've studied it, and again, looking at the range of a price tag upward from anywhere from 4 to 9 billion.
Yeah, I don't recall the exact number, but that sounds about right. Yes.
How would that change the Chicago Area Waterway System as a whole, if indeed separation was the plan?
So if separation were to take place, of course, those three systems I mentioned, the system in place for for transportation, for example, the locking systems and the movement of goods throughout the system would certainly be altered. Now, depending upon where you place the barrier, you're presented with different impacts and different potential solutions. For example, if you were to place a barrier in the middle of the Calumet system, you could probably find a place where you can have Laker ships come down into the Calumet system and interact with barge systems coming up the river. So that would be quite different. And in that location, you might be able to envision an intermodal system. But that's not the way it works today necessarily. Today there's more interaction and there's movement of goods through the entire system from the lake all the way through the ship and sanitary canal. So that's one example of how it would be different. Drainage would be very different. The water that's currently going for the past 100 years down through the channel would now have to be relocated. So depending upon where you place that barrier, you'll have different amounts of flow going into the two directions. So that will add pollutant loadings to the lake and require investments to the wastewater treatment plants, but also potentially splitting some of that flood flows actually could have some potential benefit to reducing flood risk. So the system would really it would operate very differently. And one of the problems we struggle with today is the system is managed and owned and operated by very fragmented agencies, very different people have different parts and different missions. And so trying to create a collaborative solution is really one of the biggest challenges I see beyond even these physical infrastructure systems, is the management systems that are in place are also highly fragmented and would need to come together for a common vision.
If indeed, oh, go ahead, Erin, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so we talk about changing the culture of one city in the Great Lakes region, but the reality is that if Asian carp get into the Great Lakes, where you're going to really see those impacts are in those tributaries all around, I think those core lakes that was mentioned earlier. So you're going to see the change and the safety of those areas change basin-wide, and I think that's something that needs to be taken into account as we think through these solutions as well.
There would also be a change for commerce and business, and Heather, I want to talk to you again from ArcelorMittal. How would a separation affect the way your company does business?
Right. So, yes. So first of all, we agree that Asian carp should not be in the system. I think we solidly agree on that. So I think where our perspective is finding the right solution. So I'm going to actually quote some stats here from the Lake Carrier Association, and actually it's based on a 2009 Army Corps report. So this is about the transportation and commerce that goes through the lakes, not just us, of course. So there's kind of three main points from a water perspective. Water is safer, more fuel efficient, and reduces environmental CO2 footprint. So it is a large reason why commerce has surrounded the basin, including ourselves. Here's just a few stats. If it would take 7 unit trains each with 100 cars to equal 1 cargo carrier by a 1,000 foot long laker. Now, if you do that same computation for trucks, it's equivalent to 2,800 trucks on the road. Now, if you then take that from a fuel-efficient perspective, that formula looks like ships being 4 times more fuel-efficient than trucks and nearly 2 times more efficient than trains. And then I'll talk about the CO2 footprint, or the carbon footprint, just a little bit. Ships are 90% less CO2 than trucks and 70% less than trains. So for us, this is such an important way that we reduce our own environmental footprint, and I think that a lot of industries do as well. So these waterways are really critical to us. And then I'll just mention there is a lot of complexity that has been alluded to with these systems and how they've been built. And so again, for commerce, the way that transportation moves along is very complex. So we think that we need both the right conservation solution to address that. To some of the points that were mentioned, are there other entry points? Is the time frame for if some of the proposed solutions going to really meet the need? And are we addressing not just Asian carp, but the issue as a whole? And if I might, just one more point, which is, as commerce is a part of the solution, I think there's 2 main points here. One is the transportation logistics are very, very complex. So it's not just for us, for example, it's not just raw material, it's finished product. So if you think about a large coil of steel, if any of you have seen that, if you live in Cleveland here, it's an immense weight, right? And so now think about the computations I mentioned earlier about trucks versus water and the kind of mechanics you have about how to manage logistics over this. The other component I would say from a transportation is that creating any kind of impediment or potential bottleneck could really impede commerce as well. Business is really looking at just-in-time models, which means less inventory stored. The efficiency of being able to deliver products quickly is important. From our end specifically, we're kind of the bottom of the food chain, if you will. So we're at the end of the supply chain. So any disruption to us impacts delivery along the entire supply chain, and that can be really cost impactful for business all along the way.
Aaron, I would imagine that now this is where the conversation is going to come down to when we start talking about how this impacts business and how people are going to react to this around the basin when this report eventually does get to Congress, and they're going to have to start to hear from all sides, and all sides that are going to start to lobby. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those conversations have been had. I mean, I think people are talking about it. I think that the dynamic and the willingness of everybody to discuss these issues has been great, but I do think it's going to come to a head here when they put forth this report. And again, you're always stuck with the groups that want action now because we want to protect what we have, and then looking at that balance of the economy. But I think a lot of the work has been done with the start of the Glimmer study that the Great Lakes Commission has put together to say, listen, there can be a solution where you can strike a balance between the economy and the environment, and that's where we should be.
Is there any kind of interim solution, Pete? If for some reason there is the vote that yes, there's going to be the separation, what would an interim solution while construction takes place? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume it's going to take many years to do some kind of separation.
Yes, that's right. So it's a very good point, very good question. Some of the solutions that have been proposed, of course, are predicated on the idea that there's existing systems in place, which those systems oftentimes would need to be modified first before an actual implementation of a physical barrier could be made. So the timing question is critical. For example, one project, the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, which is Chicago's primary existing flooding storage system, is not yet complete. And under most scenarios, that program needs to be completed in order to reduce the risk of increasing the flooding in Chicago. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but there's a lot of complexity in terms of timing of financing and construction phases. The interim solution, there are potentially ways to begin construction and developing barriers that aren't necessarily in both directions. But if you can create a barrier that allows flows from the Great Lakes Basin down to the Mississippi Basin, that can greatly alleviate some of the flood strains that would be made from a full separation. So it could be possible, not fully studied yet, but it could be possible to create one-way barriers prior to a complete two-way separation.
As the study is continuing, obviously we've talked about eDNA and a lot of the testing that the Army Corps of Engineers is doing. Becky, I'm going to direct this first, though, to you. How has eDNA testing changed the way we have started to track Asian carp and see where they've been headed?
Well, first, most of the eDNA work and applicability of the tool is being done in American waters. That's where the invasion front is, and that's where the focus of the work is. The science is strong, and I don't think anyone doubts the science behind it. How we're applying it and how we're using it, we're still learning about. And I'd probably turn it over to U.S. Army Corps to talk about their ECALs.
Becky, the ECAL study that I mentioned, we're trying to refine it. I mean, eDNA in the water obviously says something. And right now the position of ACRCC and the Monitoring Working Control Group is that, we're going to address when we have eDNA hits. What we have found, the ECAL study we're putting in place to analyze, we need to try to figure out what the eDNA is telling us. Right now, we don't know if it's alive, dead. We don't know if it's, how it's brought in and that type of stuff. So this ECAL study is going to be very key to us fully understanding potentially, the latest hits in Lake Erin that just went on. We're trying to understand fully what does that mean. As an example, in Chicago, Chicago, there's an area where in local area in Chicago where they sell Asian carp, and they're dead. And what we're finding is that Asian carp is on ice, and obviously there's elements of eDNA that's projected into the ice. Well, eventually that ice gets drained into the sewer system, and it's coming out in various locations of the sanitary ship canal. So part of this study is going to draw a conclusion of exactly, is that the hits that we're getting, which means that, there's no fish there. The big takeaway from all this is that through the ACRCC, we have a very well-formed interagency team led by John Goss, and anytime an eDNA comes out, we always address it. We address it with additional electrofishing, we address it with netting, and Lake Calumet's a good example. We've had several eDNA hits at Lake Calumet, and we routinely go out there and do rigorous nettings, and we still come up with nothing. So the ECAL study is going to help us sort of understand what eDNA means long-term.
We have just a couple of moments before I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. So if you have questions, make sure you make your way over to any one of the microphones that we have here, and then you can address the panel and make sure you address the specific panelists that you'd like to hear from. Aaron, what happens now? What needs to happen, do you think, in the next year?
Well, I think they need to complete the separation, but I know that's not going to happen in the next year. For our groups, it's really important to keep them engaged. I mean, anytime you have a volunteer base that's passionate about an issue, the worst thing you can do is give them nothing to do. So making sure that we're continually keeping people connected to what's happening on this issue and keeping them, you know, as the Colonel said, engaged and active, because even though it seems like to, you know, a member of the general public that we've been working on this issue for a long time, there's a reason why we've ramped up in 2012, and it's because of all of the public interest and interaction and engagement from all of the NGO communities and the general public on this issue. So for us, it's going to be really important to keep that message strong, keep people connected to it, and keep them pushing for a solution to this problem quickly.
Okay. Did we have some questions from the audience? I'm sorry. I'm looking out very... Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, Mary Muter, Great Lakes Section for Sierra Club, Ontario. My question is for Becky, and I noticed from your earlier risk assessment you did determine extensive areas on the Canadian shorelines of the Great Lakes that these invasive fish would thrive. So I'm wondering why you did not comment on your recent risk assessment, where I think you determined that within 5 years the carp would infiltrate all of the Great Lakes, and probably earlier in the middle central Great Lakes. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, no, I was told to keep it short, my answer, so I went right for the big final message and hoping that people would ask about the details. So thanks, Mary. Yes, on our recent risk assessment, we did look at the likelihood of spread into Canadian waters and the rest of the Great Lakes should there be a population established in Lake Michigan. And based on the modeling that was completed, that Asian carp would begin to, in terms of modeling, visit the Canadian waters up in Lake Huron within 2 years. Following that, they would begin to infiltrate into Lake Huron and to Lake Erie within 10 years. And at that point, though, they would find Lake Erie very, very hospitable to them. And would be not apt to leave. So it's really the central lakes that are most at risk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, yes, panelists. My name is Dorcas Johnson. I'm from Case Western at Weatherhead, and this is directed to Colonel Drummond. I looked at your Army Corps Engineers packet, and from a youth and family perspective, I wanted to speak on the recreational fishing, the billions of dollars, and the aspect that you said public engagement was a priority when you get ready to offer those range of options for the congressional report. I saw that 105 tons were caught this year, the Asian carp, I guess through netting, and that you did a Taste of Chicago type event where people were able to taste sliders with like a gourmet chef. Is it possible that we can have family fishing days and have them have advocacy so that they can say to our congressional people that we enjoyed tasting this at the Taste of Chicago, we liked fishing for them? Is that a possibility as far as what we can do as an option for mitigation?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Just want to throw a few things out there. You know, the Taste of Chicago is mainly just to raise awareness. We certainly don't advocate. We don't want to keep the Asian carp around. Our job is to prevent them from getting into Lake Michigan. But I think what you're asking is something that we all need to take a hard look at, and that's bringing the kids out to the waterway and harvesting them. I saw it, like I said earlier, firsthand down in Starved Rock. Last year we pulled out about 5 million tons through commercial netting. This year I showed up at the same place. I'm the type of guy that I'd like to get on the ground and meet the individuals that are doing it, and frankly, their statement back to me is that netting, harvesting, is having an enormous impact in the high-risk areas. So that's something that, you know, the Illinois' DNR is working very closely with the Corps and the other agencies through the ACRCC. As far as, public awareness, I would encourage you all to, take the time to understand what the silver and bighead carps do and what the overall impact. For many of us here in the room, we understand that the goal is getting that out to everybody that lives along the Illinois waterway system, and they can truly help in this fight. I think you heard earlier, it's a very, very complex undertaking, and it is going to take a system approach, a teamwork approach to deal with this, pending issue that Becky had talked about. I just want to leave you on another note that the electric barriers are in fact working. They are working as designed. By all means, the leading front of the Asian carp is still some 100 miles down, 157 miles down from where the barrier is. That's exactly how I want to keep it. And so I'm a big proponent on increasing any type of harvesting and removing the Asian carp, whether it's through a hook on a young child's line or on a big net through commercial harvesting. And I would applaud Indianapolis DNR's efforts for taking that on and making us part of that team of going down there and truly understanding where the front line of the Asian carp is at. It is, as Becky has alluded to, it is very complex. I get asked all the time, is the Asian carp going to be in Lake Michigan? And my response is right now I'm doing the best to keep them out.
Thank you.
Colonel, let me follow up real quick on the electronic barriers. There was the outage that the barriers went down for, what was it, about 13 minutes in the springtime.
Yep.
There is concern from people that
that's a very good question. It did go down. It was obviously something that we did not plan. The barrier, we have 3 barriers in place. 2 of these barriers run off of one transformer line that was installed by ComEd. I like to, it's sort of like your house. When you have an electrical storm and it's probably just at the time that you don't want the power to go out, Monday Night Football or something like that, and all of a sudden your power goes out. Well, typically it's because of a transformer. Somewhere got hit by, electrical input to it, and that's exactly what happened. We had an electrical storm. It took out the transformer. The transformer then went down, sent a surge through the line. Our backup generators, which were designed to kick on, did not kick on because one had a problem with some corrosion on a fuel pump, and the other one had a problem with the breaker, very similar to your house. That breaker kicked in too soon. Here's what's important is that we learn, and the Corps of Engineers takes that information. We brought in a very specialized team of Army individuals called the 249 Prime Power. They deploy all over the world looking at very complex backup generator problems. I brought the team in. They took a look and they made some recommendations. We're going to move some of our electrical lines around. We've already updated our generators to address this. And in fact, about 3 weeks ago, we had another electrical storm and the generators kicked in as designed. We're learning, and I would offer, if you ever want to visit the barriers, just contact my team and I'll get you out there, and you will quickly understand that there is nothing else like it in the world. It is a very complex electrical system that is it's doing what it's designed to do, and that is to repel any fish that is moving upstream. And so we'll continue to monitor that. And
Okay, I'm going to try to get to some more questions. Sir, in the back, go ahead.
Yes, this question is also for Colonel Drummond about the electric barrier's effectiveness against larval and eggs in terms of the Asian carp, and then also in the Wabash watershed, and the Maumee watershed, where they come very close together. There's a physical barrier there intended to keep the carp out, which is pretty much a chain link fence. Is there something that's being done to make those physical barriers more effective against larval fish and eggs?
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, let's talk a little bit about Wabash. You know, obviously there is a fencing networking system there. There's also going to be an additional report released here fairly soon on some other additional upgrades that we can do to that. And I might add this, this is why public awareness is very important. Any undertaking that the Corps of Engineers takes, we need a non-federal sponsor. And so I would encourage everybody out there to start talking openly about some potential options out there. And one of them is the one you're talking about. We're working with several local sponsors on trying to come up with a more long-term solution that's going to assist in that particular basin. As far as Glamorous, we're actively talking with all kinds of different organizations now, just making them aware that we are actively looking for a non-federal partner. And as Pete will tell you, you know, early estimates, let's just use the figure that came out in the Great Lakes Commission. I think it was $9+ billion for hydrologic separation. Well, in order for the Corps to do a full-up feasibility study, we got to have a non-federal partner. That's what we need. So as you can imagine, that's a fairly big undertaking.
Just going to move it on a little. I know, Aaron, that you kind of raised your hand a couple times. You wanted to say something real quick. Go ahead.
Just real quick, I want us to really be cautious when we talk about developing markets for a species like Asian carp. We have to keep fully in our mind that what we want, if both in the Mississippi Basin and if they were ever to come into the Great Lakes, is an eradication strategy. And when you start to put a value on a species, sometimes that makes it a lot more complicated to get to that concept of eradication.
All right, thanks, Aaron. I'm going to go back to the far corner. Yes, ma'am, go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Malia Gertzma. I'm an attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council's Chicago office. And my question is directed to Heather from ArcelorMittal. Several recent studies, including our own internal research, have shown that the use of the canal system for commercial barge transport has been decreasing significantly in recent years, and also that the infrastructure is crumbling and is greatly in need of new investment to make it anywhere near a modern, useful mode of transportation. And I was wondering what efforts your company and others have taken to reduce the inefficiencies and capacity constraints in the current system that might offset any impacts of separation that you see coming down the line.
So that's a great question. I have to tell you, I'm not an expert in this area. So I think that this is a question that's actually best posed to the Lake Carrier Association and to some technical experts at my company. Actually, I think we have someone here from the Northwest Indiana Forum, Kay Nelson, if she's still sitting in the audience here, who could probably address this much better than I, and maybe we can address it offline.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, ma'am, right here.
Hi, Amanda Bell from the USGS. Besides the transportation and commerce effects that a hydrologic barrier would pose, what about the effects of the water quality from 9 million people's sewage that would occur in the Great Lakes if there was a hydrologic barrier?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. So depending upon where you place this hydrologic separation will determine what percentage of that 9 million people would be draining towards the lakes. And so there is a way to place a barrier that seems to be a good location, the mid-system location, which would open up one wastewater treatment plant, which currently does not, of course, drain to the Great Lakes, and it would become a lakeside wastewater discharge. So that's a new loading to the lakes, but of course that's what's done everywhere else around the Great Lakes. There are technologies and permitting processes that can allow for that kind of discharge. It would certainly be a large hurdle in Illinois to do that, but there are ways of doing it. So your point, I think, is that yes, if you put in a physical barrier and you change the drainage, that yes, certainly you'll change the discharge to the Great Lakes. And then the question is open, how far do you have to go to treat that water to make it socially acceptable for this new discharge into the lakes? Very fair question.
Thanks, Pete. Why don't you go ahead? Right here, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Parker from Shed Aquarium. Could you please speak to other high-risk entry points and the efforts that are being made there to prevent introduction?
Yes.
Anyone on the panel?
Well, I could maybe get
Thank
started.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is focus area 2. Again, there's 18 areas that are of concern, and out of these 18 areas, what you're going to see in the report that's going to be recently released, the executive report's going to come out on Friday, is that what we have done is we have taken this report and we have put it into 3 categories, and you'll see high risk, I think it's medium risk and low risk, and this report will be presented. So really it comes down to, once the facts are out there, is the non-federal partners working closely with my team on the direction that they want to go. For instance, there may be some areas that are very low risk because of water influence and the reduced risk of flooding. Them are areas that the non-federal partner or the local state may elect not to do anything with, just because it's very low risk and there's a very low probability using the risk management section of Asian carp getting up through that pathway. On the other hand, you have places like Eagle Marsh where it's more high risk. That's where we're taking a little bit more deliberate process, working with our non-federal partners through the ACRCC, also the DNRs of each state, and addressing this in an open forum with them on how they want to take care of this specific pathway. And again, I have Dave Romano down here in front. Dave, you can raise your hand. He is actually going to release that report on Friday, and I'm sure he'd be glad to talk a little bit more about it.
And we look forward to that. And Becky, I'm going to let you get the last word in here.
Sure. We looked at 2 different categories. We looked at physical routes and human-mediated release as entry points into the Great Lakes. Unlike Glimmers, which was ranking risk for all aquatic invasive species, we looked at the physical connections in term for Asian carp only. We did find that the physical connections had a greater likelihood as an entry point than human-mediated release, but with a caveat that there was a greater uncertainty surrounding how we can characterize human-mediated release. We did look at illegal live trade, and we also looked at bait movement and how fish can be inadvertently moved around through the bait trade as well.
All right, and that is going to wrap up the time that we have for right now talking about the Asian carp problem. I'd like to thank our panel for being here. A lot of great information was exchanged. And do take them up on the offer to talk to the people out in the audience that they have brought with them, experts in the field, if you have further questions. Thanks for your attention today, and thanks very much for having me. Take care.